Barely 65 miles long and as narrow as a mile wide, Cape Cod is a sliver of sand with an outsized sense of self. Personified by its geography, the Cape juts out into the Atlantic as a determined, flexed arm, as if to say, I'm here, and I'm different. And for the people who live on the Cape, their story and culture is shaped by a fiercely strong sense of place. The homes they built were quaint, the scale small, and all driven by nature and need.
Well, I think what they saw here was the amazing fishing industry, shell industry, and farming industry. I mean, they had cranberries, they made salt, they shipped fish to the mainland. Fishing obviously was the big industry here. So yeah, it was a very harsh area to live in. I mean, they were self-sustaining farms back then. You know, they had a cow, they had horses, they had gardens, they had orchards. You read a lot of the early diaries, and that's how they survived.
The ancestors of the Wampanoag were the first people on Cape Cod. Their way of life forever changed with the arrival of the Europeans in the early 1600s. These new settlers from across the Atlantic with names like Nickerson, Alden, Chase, and Sears, whose descendants, along with the Wampanoag, are still living across the Cape. But in all these years, they have never seen a time like this.
It hurts me to see our heritage and what we grew up with and the charm and the quietness of the Cape turn into these monster homes that are only used sometimes 2 weeks of the year. It's devastating.
On the remote peninsula, the Europeans constructed simple and sturdy homes, suitably adapted to the harsh environment. The designs and building methods they used from England can be seen today. While other parts of the U.S. were changing rapidly, powered by immigrant labor and industrial might, the pace and life moved far more slowly on the Cape. This created a kind of time capsule where hundreds of older homes and buildings survived into the 21st century.
It's the historic houses on the Cape embody what the Cape's all about and why people come here, and what people want to do when they're on the Cape is understand the history of this nation that goes back to 1620 and even before that.
I mean, it's all these houses and these places, everyone has an individual story to tell. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but it is part of the story. It's part of the fabric of who we are today, good or bad.
They captured the character of the town today and the village today. And they let us know that we are part of a much longer progression of history here on the Cape.
For Cape Codders who have lived with all this history, it's easy to take old buildings for granted because they've always been around. But these structures are vulnerable and vanishing in increasing numbers. With the loss of every building, a piece of the cultural heritage of Cape Codders vanishes with it.
You know, death by a thousand cuts, where you just lose one or two buildings in every neighborhood, but if you do that every year, it gradually erodes the number of historic properties and the ability of that neighborhood to really reveal its history and to attract people to the Cape.
Well, I think that every time we lose something from the landscape, we're losing a part of ourselves. And before you know it, you've lost all of these memories of the past. And they're significant because they're not only the things that you remember, but now they're the things that you're relaying as storylines to the present generation.
Cape Cod is only one of a handful of places where people live in and around the homes their ancestors built. And what they built tells their story.
Living in a historic house feels like I'm part of something. Our family is part of something. We are adding on to a story that was already there for over 100 years before the house became part of my family. I'm fascinated by the fact that every house has a story, and very few of us know what it is. Even if we live in the house, we may not know what the story is. And once you start digging into it, you virtually meet these people who lived in the structure before, and you get to know them, and you start to think about their lives and their experiences in this place, and then you just want to know more.
Carpenters, tradespeople, and the service industry are now the backbone of Cape Cod's middle class. For these hard-working families, finding decent, affordable housing is tough. One by one, smaller, older, affordable homes are being replaced by multi-million-dollar mansions. Providing incentives to preserve historic homes is not causing the Cape's housing crisis, but can be part of the solution.
And you see them driving onto the Cape in the morning. It's a rush hour on the bridges and getting off the Cape because they can't afford to live here.
People believe there is diminished value in keeping older homes at the expense of building newer ones, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Historic homes bring tourists, promote cultural tourism, grow economies, and help families. Tearing down older homes has other costs.
So from an environmental perspective, there's a real value to preserving the embodied carbon that's in the structural frame of these buildings and not generating additional waste.
Those trees have already been cut down. They've been kiln dried. They've been transported. They've been cut. They've been put together. When you think about it that way, a historic home actually is the more ecological home. It's the greenest home.
Newer is definitely not better when it comes to the wood that houses are built with. Wood in older homes has passed the ultimate test: time.
There's no more old-growth forests. I mean, the wide pine floors that were 16 inches wide with no knots in them, they just aren't growing trees like that anymore. They've all been harvested, now they're replaced with fast-growing wood for the construction industry.
In a regular room, regular house, conventionally built, where you have sheetrock on the walls, you can't see the living wood. And you don't feel anything about it. It's just a big white wall. In a timber frame, it's more like a piece of furniture because you see everything. You see the frame, you see what's holding it up, you see the big rafters, and you feel good, you feel safe because it's what's holding you up. You can see the structure.
I can take a house that's 200 years old and find incredible beams, incredible pieces of wood, incredible just old latches, all that stuff. What are you going to have when you take apart the new house? And they don't last that long, but it's going to be what? It's going to be plywood and whatever.
The Cape's history may rival Williamsburg or Charleston, but the similarity stops there. Well-heeled benefactors help protect those places, while the Cape has traditionally had a more low-key approach to historic preservation. However noble, the mindset of doing nothing is now threatening the scale, look, and feel of what was here for generations. The appeal, allure, and charm of the Cape is being tested as never before.
The Cape is becoming subject to that suburban sprawl that has created these kind of vast, boring landscapes of anonymous automobile transactions that our towns will become basically servants of the automobile as opposed to people walking and dealing with each other face to face. And that will become essentially like a gated community that starts at the bridges. And that's not something that most people want.
As these areas get discovered, people start flocking to them. And now, for instance, Chatham, Osterville, areas like that, they have like a zip code and address that people want to know they own a property on. It's sort of it's become a status thing.
I want to bring my New Jersey house. I want to bring my California house. I want to bring my this. I want to bring my that. So they want to move to the Cape because they like the Cape, but what they don't realize is they're destroying the Cape by bringing their own form of living to the Cape.
In Europe, people who live in historic houses understand that while they may own it on paper, they have a much greater responsibility to the history of that property. Why can't it be the same here?
If you buy an old home on the Cape, whether it's 1880 or 1680, you're buying something that you're a caretaker, you're not an owner. Because our time here is limited, but the house has been here for anywhere from 100 to 300 years.
Chronologically, of course, they're newer. I mean, we can't go to a 1,000-year-old cathedral in North America. We just can't do it. But that doesn't mean that the stuff that we have isn't of value.
When you tear a house down today, you simply cannot rebuild it to look like an old house. It will, number one, necessarily be larger because building codes require higher ceiling heights and all kinds of other things added to a house that change its appearance. And then in addition to that, when you tear down an old house, you lose the patina that's on an old house. That slight worn texture that you see on an old house never gets replicated. And, you know, to my eye as an architect, if something is new, I'd rather it just be new.
Cape Cod is an experience that we feel the moment we finally cross the bridge. And if we enjoyed the Cape as children, those warm summer memories seem to draw us back again, to recapture something precious in our past.
A lot of people come here and have kind of prime youth experiences that resonate through their life, and that they're full of all sorts of wonderful memories of connection, of family, of kind of like sensory novelties, going into salt water for the first time, or the temperature shock off of Nauset, or, you know, whatever it could be, or the smell of bayberry walking down there. And it's like, these are things that stick with people.
This is not just about saving historic houses. There are iconic shops and restaurants that families have enjoyed for generations, and they give the Cape its unique and defining charm. This building in the center of Brewster was constructed as a church in 1852 and converted into a general store in 1866. George Boyd and his wife Missy have owned the Brewster General Store since 1986. From the penny candy to the antique parlor stove, there are thousands of unique items that transport visitors to a different time. The moment you step onto the front porch, you experience something that has remained a quintessential example of what people love about Cape Cod.
It is what we are, and that people come to us because that's what they want. And, you know, people will come and they'll come into the town, into the store, and sometimes you just see them relax. First of all, we're selling the past. You have a different feel when you come in here. The Nickelodeon's playing. Sometimes the peanut roaster is roasting. We still have the old wooden maple floors. And the old counters and all the old antiques. So you get that sense of it.
What worked in the past will not work now, as the changes overtaking Cape Cod need to be managed with reasonable, common-sense solutions. The first step is slowing things down before the wrecking ball arrives. Well-crafted demolition delays give owners and communities critical time to collaborate and come up with sensible options to preserving historic structures. The power is with the people on Cape Cod. In New England town meetings, voices are heard and votes count. In the town of Barnstable, there's now an 18-month demolition delay that's not designed to be punitive.
It's mainly to get the community to understand what's involved and what's going to happen, and also for the owners to maybe give it a second thought.
Changing the rules won't solve everything. Deep-pocketed homeowners and developers who are determined to get what they want are hard to stop. The challenges are daunting, but must be met with reasoned, achievable solutions that manage change to the benefit of all.
It's a compromise. It's a blend. It's got many faces of significance. It's a blend of all types of restoration, rehabilitation, stabilization, replication. There's documentation of the history, repurposing of the original elements. There's so many, preservation has so many faces, it's not just one.
Realtors have an important role and responsibility in shaping the Cape's future.
You know, you just handwrite a letter to various historic societies saying, this property is at risk. It's going to be marketed for sale. Please spread the word to people who love historic properties so that we can connect them and hopefully save this house. It has been very successful, and I've been able to save some properties. If you market to the right people, you are not going to take a hit on the price. In fact, I think you can get more for a historic home, and I can prove it. So across the Cape, when I do comps, when I'm doing a listing appointment, I always comp against other historic properties. And across the board, it doesn't matter. The historic home will invariably be worth more than a non-historic home of the same square footage.
Another resource to save the Cape's historic structures and streetscapes is already working. But the value and role of historic commissions isn't always appreciated, fully understood, or utilized. Across the Cape, historical commissions are filled with legions of committed volunteers, hailing from old families and new. From all walks of life, these hard-working people are dedicated to finding reasonable approaches to saving historic structures. These commissions work with homeowners, builders, and architects, not as adversaries, but in the interest of the communities they serve. They can't do it alone. They need help and support. That starts with a conversation.
There is a perception out there that we're stodgy obstructionists, that we are looking to prevent progress. We're looking to change that. We're not looking to stop progress. We're looking to manage progress in a way that preserves our rich history, our heritage, our sense of place.
There is another tool available to saving historic houses that's been used for centuries: the pattern book. In cities and towns across the U.S., including the Cape, the pattern book gave homeowners and builders a user-friendly manual that was a creative force in helping to shape the look and feel of main streets.
Well, somebody wanted to build a house. Well, what kind of house do I build? But there was a pattern, in other words, drawings of these are the kind of houses that we have in town.
Generations of ingenious Cape Codders kept their historic homes, or at least parts of them, making renovations to fit their needs.
People utilized the resources that they had and didn't see the need to take things down just to build something new. And, you know, a lot of times they couldn't use the whole house or couldn't save a house, then they'd take the timber from it.
I won't say simple process, but it's a process that was done quite a bit, because we don't need it here, but I need it somewhere else, so why not take it apart and put it together? It's a lot easier than cutting all that wood from scratch and then building it from scratch when those pieces of material are still in excellent condition.
Some houses around here were even built out of salvaged timbers from shipwrecks. Preserve this stuff, find a new home for it, repurpose it. Maybe even repurpose a few old beams into your new home. Repurpose a door frame, repurpose a window. Don't dumpster it. Don't throw it all away, because you can't replace it. There is no more.
The challenge of keeping a historic house is nothing new. In Brewster in the 1880s, Albert Crosby wanted to save his modest boyhood home and give his young bride, a Chicago burlesque dancer, a grand mansion befitting the lavish parties she loved to host. Crosby's solution was building a 35-room home enveloping the older house, and it would take another generation of dedicated volunteers committed to the Crosby Mansion to preserve it for our enjoyment today. The modernist movement in the early 20th century is an important part of Cape Cod history. By the Cape standard, these 80-year-old houses may not seem that old, but the Cape Cod Modern House Trust was created in Wellfleet because this is another important part of history that should be preserved.
Actually, the modernist houses have an ethos of small, green, very low impact. They're very, very respectful of their sites. You have to give people context for who did it, why, what is part of this moment in history, and how does it tie into the story of the town and the cultural story of the country. So I'd say that's a very important part of it. You can't say, hey, here's a cool building, let's save it.
These modernist masterpieces, some of which you can rent, are filled with stories about people who stayed in them. European artists, intellectuals, and architects escaping World War II were drawn to the Cape. Among them, luminaries like Walter Gropius, who designed the JFK Federal Building in Boston. Historic houses all over the Cape are filled with stories. These human stories, like the houses themselves, are hiding in plain sight. For generations, the Cape has attracted people from all walks of life, from artists to actors, business magnates to playwrights. How many people know that Helen Keller and her teacher Anne Sullivan spent time in Brewster? It's not only historic structures that need protecting, but the stories of the people who were inside also need to be told and preserved. In the 1970s, a group of concerned Falmouth residents joined forces to save historic Highfield Hall in Gardens. It's a classic example of adapt and reuse, as a historic mansion built in the 1800s was transformed into a cultural center, a treasure for the entire community.
In the beginning, it was pennies makes dollars, and the community members were out on the corner of Main Street holding up signs trying to get people to donate to save Highfield Hall and Gardens and contribute whatever they could. It was grassroots, it was the entire community coming together, and it was a house that was restored to be used for the community.
Some people committed to saving Highfield Hall tied themselves to trees to get noticed. Now, we don't need to go that far anymore. Another great option is to find a team of influencers.
Form a committee as quickly as possible of people who both care about whatever building it is and have skill sets that can make something happen. I think the town is getting it, but we have all kinds of meetings we can stand up and make our case in. I think that's the more civil version of tying yourself to the tree.
Saving Cape Cod means engaging old and especially younger people, those who care about the character and history of Cape Cod, and they do exist.
So raising a family here, it's important to me that the kids know their roots, know the history of the area, and that's something as simple as taking them out on the weekends and showing them something that might be hidden in plain sight.
Like I said, people my own age, mid-30s to 40s, who do have that nostalgia factor and want to see the Cape kind of retain that culture and those characteristics.
Similar to these people who have stepped up, there are hard-working volunteers in historical commissions and societies across the Cape who will offer help and expertise. The future of the Cape is with Cape Codders themselves, whose opinions are heard and votes counted in town meetings. The power to preserve the Cape is with the people who live on the Cape. Every Cape Codder whose family has been here for 13 generations, to those who moved in this year, has a voice. an opportunity, and an obligation to step up, speak up, and save what is precious and irreplaceable.